Hey guys, welcome back to the Out Jeeping YouTube channel. My name's Austin. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to install some rear section frame stiffeners on a Jeep Cherokee XJ. Now today we're going to be doing it on my 99 Jeep Cherokee, and recently you guys saw me install them for the midsection, and even before that on my old Jeep, you guys saw me install them on the front. Now today it's time to start tackling the rear and get these installed so I can start fixing the rest of the rust that's on the back of this Jeep. There's going to be a lot of work to get done, so let's get started. Alright, so taking a look at what we're going to be installing today, these are the rear section frame stiffeners for the Jeep Cherokee XJ. And these ones right here are made by Dirtbound Off-Road. Now these ones are made of nice 1/8 inch construction, so it should be nice and solid for that rear end, especially if you have a hitch or if you're towing or have any tow points in the back. This is really going to stiffen it up on that unibody. Now as you can see, we got a total of 4 sections here. 2 of them go per side, so there really isn't going to be a whole lot of bending in place that we have to do other than these thin ends over here. Once we fit it up to the frame, we'll have to bend it into place to match that same angle that's on the frame. I know from other companies that you do have to do a lot more bending, but these are nice with the smaller sections to work with when getting these up there. Product that I'm going to feature is using some weld-through primer. I just picked this up off Amazon. It's a little bit pricey, but definitely worth it for when you're welding this in, because we're going to have to clean off the frame from any existing paint and undercoating and rust. And then before we weld these in, we want to coat it with some weld-through primer, and this is going to give it a nice protective layer with also being able to weld onto that surface for wherever we're welding this into place. And then we're also going to use it on the back side of the frame stiffener that's going to get covered up by the frame. So that's pretty much it for the frame stiffeners. There isn't too much about them other than they're steel and they're cut perfectly to fit onto our Jeep. A lot of the work is going to be in prep work and getting that Jeep ready to accept these and weld them into place. So a couple prep things I've already done to get this Jeep ready is I actually removed the fuel tank and I got the rear shocks out of the way. Rear shocks don't necessarily need to be out of there, but since I'm doing a couple other projects at the same time, I went ahead and got those removed. A fuel tank, you're definitely going to want to remove that just because it's a huge fire hazard and you're working so close to it with welding sparks and everything like that. If you want to know how to remove a fuel tank, I got another video on replacing a fuel pump. You guys want to check that out before you start welding these into place. With those items already removed, we still have a little bit to do. I want to get the Jeep up in the air, get the rear tires off, so that way we can weld in that rear wheel well area, and then we can start grinding off all the paint and stuff that's on the frame. So let's head over to the Jeep. Alright, so sitting in the wheel well here with the wheels off, we got a good platform to basically work in here. It's pretty nice, a lot nicer to be able to sit down and weld in here compared to when we did the midsection where we're laying on our backs, and it's a little bit annoying there, but this should be a little bit easier. However, looking at my Jeep, I do have a lot of frame rot towards the back here where our fuel filler hoses went through here. And on the underside there's actually a couple holes which I knew about a few years ago when I took off the hitch because it was so rusted out. So on the bottom here I will be cutting that out and just patching it with some steel and then putting the frame stiffeners over that and welding it all in solid. But I won't bore you guys with that because a lot of it's just cutting out old metal, welding in new stuff, just patching it all together, and it's kind of specific to whatever rust you have on your Jeep. But overall, on the majority of the section, it's still pretty solid. A little bit of rust here and there. I was just taking a wire wheel just to see how deep some of it was. And a lot of the undercoating is still on here. So we're going to have to do the same thing what we did before. I'm going to use my little heated chisel trick. Basically just take a blowtorch, kind of heat up this rubberized coating, and take a chisel and just kind of peel it off, because that way your wire wheels won't get all clogged up with that rubber, and it should be able to strip down the paint after that very nicely. There is going to be a couple other things we're going to have to take off other than the fuel tank. I do have these bump stops in place, so I got a couple 5/16 bolts going up through here. If you still have your rear sway bar, you're going to have to take that off as well through these 2 bolts up here. I don't have mine on, but I left the bolts in here so that way they don't rust up. So when we fit up our frame stiffener, we can actually use these bolts and tighten it snug up to the frame. So we'll have to remove those as well. I'm going to start taking off these bump stops. They should come out relatively easy since I installed them a couple of years ago and put some anti-seize. Or maybe not. I'm going to work that bolt back and forth. Ooh. There that one goes. So I'm not liking how this bolt's feeling over here. Don't want it to break, so I'm just going to heat up the frame a little bit. Hopefully it breaks that guy free. Just going to work it back and forth. And there we go. It's coming now. Ooh. All full of water in there. These were brand new a couple of years ago, but that's probably why they rust out. And then your 2 frame mount sway bar bolts are going to be a 15mm. Alright, I'll get the other side done and then we'll start removing this rubber undercoating. So with those now removed, I'm going to move on to removing this undercoating. Basically I want to get this outer portion of the frame all exposed, as well as the underside right here, basically all the way back to the rear bumper and then down here where our front leaf spring mount is. So you guys have seen me do this before, basically just taking a blowtorch, heating it up and taking a scraper and scraping it off. And in my opinion this is the quickest way to get it off without gumming up all your wire wheels and such. Alright, so I got as much undercoating off as I could with the heated chisel. Now I'm going to go with an aggressive wire wheel and get the rest of it off and basically clean up as much as I can. And then once we get to that point, I'm going to address all the rusted out spots where I might need a patch. It is pretty bad here where that fuel filler hose goes into the tank, so I actually might have to cut out that section of frame rail and kind of fab something up. But once we get all those patches replaced, I'll do a test fit on our frame stiffeners and basically trace out where all the welds are going to be and make sure that's really clean. And then we can go in with the zinc primer and get the back sides of everything that's going to be welded together all painted up, and then we can start fitting it up for the final time to weld it into place. But for now, let's put some more elbow grease in and get this all prepped out. Alright, so a little update. I got all the sections that had major rust on them. I cut them all out and got them all patched up. And that was pretty much this whole underside from here all the way back to the rear bumper. It was just too bad to keep that original metal in there with a bunch of holes. So I cut it all out, a little bit on the side here and then a little bit on the back side. There's a few spots where I just patched them up. I used some 16 gauge steel to patch it up. That's pretty much a thickness that the unibody frame rail is in. I believe it's doubled up on the bottom here. But since we're adding frame stiffeners, that's another 1/8 inch that's going to go on the bottom here where our hitch is going to bolt onto, so it should still be plenty strong. Then I ground it down pretty much flat as I could. It was a little bit difficult to weld to since a lot of it just kept blowing holes through. But now we're at the point where we can start adding our frame stiffeners on. As you guys recall, for the rear section there's 2 different halves, and I'm going to start with the front half, which is going to go over here. So the next thing I'm going to do is dry fit this up to the Jeep. Get it clamped in a couple spots and then basically trace out where all my welds are going to be and make sure that I have all the paint removed where those welds are going to be, and then we can spray some weld through primer on the back sides of our frame stiffeners and frame. So I'm going to take our piece here, put that into place, and basically just going to line this so it's centered with this seat bracket right here, and then take a C-clamp and hold it into place. When we start welding, we'll get more clamps in here to make sure it's flush up against the frame, but this is good just for mock purposes. Now I'm going to take a Sharpie and outline everything. Make sure to get the section along the back here where you have to weld on the underside. You may notice down here that this still has to get bent up. I'll do that when we get everything all painted, but I'm just going to take a Sharpie and mark where it's basically going to get welded. Alright, so now I got my marks in. Now I'm just going to finish up with the wire wheel. Alright, so I got our frame stiffener in there for the final time, and just got a couple clamps holding it into place right now. I'm going to tack it around those clamps and then move the clamps as I move along. I want to get everything all tacked into place before we start fully burning it in. So, we're going to fire up the welder, and we'll get a couple tacks on there. Alright, so for some reason my camera shut off on that one, but I got it all tacked in on this front side first, and I'm not going to tack it in on the bottom yet since we still do need to move it around and get this part bent up, and I don't want to pop any of my tack welds free quite yet. So I'm going to do a couple hot stitches on the front here and really burn it in a couple spots, and then I'm going to work on the bottom and get that all tacked in, and then we'll fully weld this all up. And while I'm welding this in, I am going to jump around to different spots so that way I don't put too much heat into one spot and possibly warp some metal out of the way and create gaps in between the unibody and the stiffener. Alright, so a little update. I got the front section all welded in the best I could. Now I got this rear section all mocked up over here. Got a couple clamps on it, and opposed to the front section, the rear section over here, there is a couple weird bends that it has to follow with the existing frame rail. So on the bottom here, there is a couple relief cuts. Since right here, if you're going from the back, this kind of bends inward, and then it kind of bends back straight with the rest of the frame about right here. So you see those two relief cuts. That's where the frame stiffener is supposed to bend and follow the curves of the frame. Also over here, this tab, once you lift it up, I had to take a jack to push this all the way up and then clamp it, but this was straight before. It's going to curve and bend to the shape of the frame right here, and then that's going to pretty much sit flat. If it's not sitting flat, we're gonna have to push it up with the jack while we tack it into place. One thing I did have to do is actually grind out this weld right here, just because I forgot how close the front and rear section are to each other. So I got that ground out, so that way when I weld this in, I can basically just weld the stiffeners together right here now. But as far as alignment on this rear guy, you can go off of your hitch bolts where the cutout holes are on the bottom, which will be back here, or you can do your bump stop holes, which are right here. Both of mine are actually been cut out since I replaced all that metal in there, so I'm pretty much eyeballing it, but it's pretty close. You really can't get it too far off. You want to make sure that the under part of the stiffener is laying flat all the way to the rear bumper, and there's a little bit of a lip towards the end, so that way this thing can't stick out past it going too far back. So same thing as before. If you haven't already, you're going to go ahead and mark where you're welding. If you haven't cleaned off the frame good enough yet, you can go ahead and do that. I already got mine pretty clean. Now I'm just going to take this off and we're going to spray it in again and then start tacking it to the frame. And once again, on the underside, these are the relief cuts that they put in here, so that way this bends to the frame. So you can see with the clamps I put on there, it already kind of bent this a little bit bowed down, and then it's supposed to bow up just slightly right here. Once I get more clamps on there and do a final fit, it'll totally conform. Alright, so with everything all painted up behind the frame stiffener, I got this all mocked up now for the final time, and now we're just going to start tacking this into place, move along with the jack and the C-clamps all the way back until everything's all tacked in, and then we'll fully burn it in. Alright, with it all tacked in, now we can go through and fully burn it into place. Alright, so with that other side all welded up, I'm moving over here onto the driver's side, and as you can see, I've already went ahead and kind of patched up some areas that were completely rusted out. One of them is this big area over here where you have your fuel filler hoses that pass through the rear of the frame and they go into the tank on the other side. Now, this is a very popular place for these XJs to rot out, and mine was pretty much rotted. It wasn't like completely gone, but all the metal was pretty much rusted inside and out. So I decided to actually cut out a whole entire section of the frame from about 3 inches above that hole over here, basically all the way back to the leaf spring mount. I did that on the outer, the bottom, and the inner part of the frame, so it's completely cut out of there. And basically I took some new 16th gauge sheet metal and reconstructed this area over here, and now it's nice and solid, probably more solid than it was before. And I just took some measurements on how big that hole was from the old one. It's not going to be circular, but it's squarish since it's not too fancy on what I was doing. But the way I constructed it was basically I have 3 solid pieces, the outside, inner, and the bottom. To make this all boxed in on the inner side, I basically just bent it 90 degrees. So on this outer piece, I actually have the 2 tabs that bent, and so we got this back piece over here and this front piece right here. And then on the inner part of the frame, I basically bent the cutout straight down, and so it bent down here, and once I had everything together, it was basically welded all the seams up, and so now this is all closed in, so that way no road debris gets in here and inside your frame, so everything should be nice and sealed. And then to finish it up, I just replaced this bottom section right here where your hitch usually mounts to. And since I did the other side as well, once I get the frame stiffeners on, I'll have to go back and drill all the holes. What's nice about the frame stiffeners is they have all the cutouts for the holes for the hitch, so I know exactly where they are. And on top of that, I have some new nut strips that sit inside the frame rail where your hitch would normally bolt into, so we can use that for alignment as well. Over here, there's another patch I had to do right where that bump stop was. There was just like a little hole there, so I decided just to cut out this whole area. I will have to drill and probably tab new holes for those bump stops to go into place, and those are another common spot for those to rust out. But overall, it was very time consuming. I spent majority of the day, about 6 hours, just kind of getting this all dialed in. Ground down the welds I needed to get the frame stiffeners over, and I'm pretty much just about ready to put this side in. I'm just going to grind down a little bit more paint, get a wire wheel, and then I'm going to paint this with some weld through primer, and then we can get those frame stiffeners set into place. Alright, so we got our piece in. Now I'm going to start tacking this into place. Just for this one, I'm going to start working on the rear section before the front section, just because I got this all new patched up over here. Just want to make sure everything lines up perfectly. So same thing as before, got our C-clamps into place, got a jack pushing up right here. So now we're all ready to go over here. Also got these painted on the back side of the frame stiffeners. You guys have seen me do that on the other side, so now I'm going to go and tack this in. Alright, with everything all tacked in, now I'm going to go and fully burn this all in. Once again, just keep jumping around because you don't want to put too much heat in one area and possibly warp some stuff. So just do a little welding here and then kind of jump onto the other side. So a little trick I like to do when doing these plug welds is I like to lay a bead that primarily focuses on just connecting the unibody to this piece right here. It's not exactly filling up this entire gap right here, but I'm just laying a bead at least on one side of this slit, and then I'll go back and completely fill this all in, so that way we can grind it down when it's done, and then it'll be nice and smooth and you won't see it. Alright, so I got this side all pretty much fully burned in, except for the weld on this bottom piece right here and on the side. So that way when I put in the new piece, that's actually all going to join together. So leaving that bare for now. Now I'm going to go and fit up our last piece going up here on the front. Alright, so while fitting up this final piece right here, I'm running into a little bit of an issue. As you can tell, it's about a 1/4 inch off from actually fitting it to place. I can't go any more forward because of this seat bracket that's right here. Part of it was my problem. I should have put both of these sections in at the same time and then tacked them in and then fully welded them in instead of doing one at a time, but we'll just have to cut off just a 1/4 inch right here because I welded this in just about a 1/4 inch forward, but it wasn't able to go any far back because it was already touching the leaf spring mount over here. So no big deal, we'll just have to cut off a 1/4 inch right here and then tack this in. If I was mounting a suspension component where things have to actually get aligned, I'll be a little bit more concerned, but it should be fine for now. So I'm just going to go cut this off and then we'll fit this into place. Alright, so I finished up with all the welding and everything looks good and nice and strong. Now the next step we're going to do is do the painting process. So you guys have seen me do this before with the PUR15 and such, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. Now, since I did weld this with flux core, we got a lot of this flux and slag still all over here, so we're going to have to wire wheel this, get all of this off of here, and clean it up for a nice paintable surface. Now, if you want to, you can take your welds and kind of grind them down smooth if you so choose to. For me, mine don't look terrible if I do say so myself, so I'm just going to wire wheel it and then be done with it. And if you leave that weld on there, it's going to give it a little bit more strength to having that material. So I'm going to go around and clean up both sides. I'm also doing the floor underneath the gas tank since I have the gas tank removed right now. I'm not going to get too into that, but I've already wire wheeled that and got all the rust off there, and I actually used a rust converter agent called Rust Cutter, which basically has phosphoric acid, so on any remaining rusted areas it kind of converts that into a nice paintable surface. So we're going to use PUR15 on the underside of that as well. But now let's just go ahead and get this all wired wheeled and nice and ready. Then we're going to wax and grease remove it, and then we'll move on to the paint. Stuff thickened up quite a bit in the can. I kept it in the refrigerator since summer when I was doing the frame on the J10, and it's hardened up and got pretty thick, so hopefully I have enough to at least do a coat over everything. I'm not going to buy another can right now since currently on Amazon it's listed for 70 bucks, which is a little bit steep for what I'm doing. I remember years ago when I first started buying it, it was only about 35, 36 bucks, so not too bad. Alright, so I got the PUR15 all on and just had enough to do the whole underside of the floor where the gas tank was, and unfortunately only enough to do one coat. So that's where I'm going to go and do a couple more layers of some other paint, and I'll explain a little bit what I'm doing here. Basically I'm doing it in a 4-step process. So first process is PUR15. Normally I like to do 2-3 coats of that, but unfortunately only had enough to do one. So next I'm going to move on to a primer, and I'm going to move to a Duplicolor self-etching primer. So this is really going to bite into that existing PUR15. Otherwise you have to really agitate it, need some Scotch-Brite if you just want to go and paint right over it. So I'm going to hit it with a couple coats of this, and then once that's dry I'm going to move on to basically any sort of top coat paint you want to do. I preferably like to do just black. I'm just going to use this Engine ceramic paint. It's a semi-gloss black finish, and I like the finish of this. So I'm going to do that on there, even though I'm going to do an undercoating. Any spots that aren't undercoated, it'll still leave a nice appearance with this. So I'm going to do a few coats with that, and then once that is all dry, I'll give it a good day or so to fully harden up. Next I'll move on to a undercoating. I like using this 3M stuff. It is a little bit pricey, but it's a nice hard rubber undercoating, which is going to match our factory undercoating right here. I've used it for years in the past and have no issues. So this will be our final coat right here. So I'm going to move on and start with our self-etching primer. And with this stuff you kind of want to work light at first. Give it some time to kind of flash, and it'll really bite into that. You don't want to go crazy spraying the sun thick at first. So we're just going to start off light and then do a couple coats. That way we just get even coverage. Not going too crazy with it. That's all I'm really going to start off with at first. Move around to other areas, get even coverage, and then come back and just do another light coat just like that. And so basically with this adding more layers of paint, It's going to ensure it's 100% sealed, because a POR 15 is not perfect, especially on tight, sharp corners. It gets so thin sometimes where it just won't even cover that. So this is going to help kind of protect everything, so that way those little areas get covered and gets a nice seal. POR 15 will act as a good base. Alright, so I let the paint cure for 24 hours. Now it's the last step. I'm just going to hit it with some rubberized undercoating. I'm going to do a few thin coats, let it dry up, and then it'll start building up that nice thick layer of rubber undercoating. So I'll let this cure for a little bit and then come back with a couple more coats. Alright, so with our undercoating all finally dried, now we can start putting components back together. As you can see, I already got the gas tank all put back in. I'll cover that in another video on a fuel pump replacement if you guys are interested. But one other thing we can do, if you still have your rear sway bar system and you want to still keep it in there, you can bolt that back up in there. That's going to utilize the two holes going up into the frame over here, and then over here onto the axle side where the leaf spring is. For me, I took mine out and I'm going to leave it out. So another thing we can do is install our bump stops that go up into here. And these frame stiffeners, they do have the cutouts for the bolts, so you can just slap that back in and bolt it exactly where it was before. Unfortunately for mine, my frame was all rusted around that area. I cut out and replaced the metal there, so there actually is nothing for the bump stop to bolt into. So what I did instead was actually just to drill it out and installed some nut certs. That way I'll have a bolt that I can thread in there nicely. If I just try to tap it with that metal, it's only 16th gauge, so it might not hold it as well as what a nut cert would do. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to be swapping out different bump stops. This was the one I had on there. I put these on a couple of years ago. These are still extended 4-inch bump stops for this, but the reason why I'm switching is because right here, as you can see, there's a nice pocket, and these were completely filled with water and just rusting out here, and that wasn't good. That was probably what rotted out my frame right there and put a hole in there. So I'm not a fan of these guys, so I'm switching to these ones right here. These are some polyurethane ones by Daystar. Nice flat top over here, so that way no water or anything is going to get caught in there. So I got some nut certs already pre-installed. I'm just going to take our bolts with some anti-seize and thread them into place. I went with 1/4-inch hardware on this, even though there was 5/16 hardware before. I just didn't have 5/16 nut certs on hand to install, but 1/4-inch should be just as fine. I don't want to go crazy tight with these, but just nice and snug, because I don't want these nut certs to accidentally pop out or anything. That's nice and solid right there, and that should do its job. Now obviously if you have a rear trailer hitch or a bumper that ties into your basically factory hitch mounts, you're going to want to put that back on as well. I currently don't have anything going on back there, so I don't have to worry about that, but that pretty much wraps up this project as a whole. Alright guys, that's going to be a wrap on the frame stiffeners. Overall, it's not too complicated of a process as long as your Jeep isn't too rusty. Unfortunately for me, I had to do a lot of frame repair before I can weld those guys on. But if you have a nice clean Jeep, all you got to do is pretty much just prep the surface, get it ready to weld in, stick them on, and just burn away, and then paint them when you're done. You guys have seen me do it on the center section and the front section in my past videos, and it's nothing really too different on the rear. A couple other things is obviously removing that gas tank was a big thing, because you don't want to obviously blow up or start any fires. So safety is #1 on that. But also I wasn't too bad at welding either, because with that fuel tank out, you can get inside and crawl underneath the Jeep in a comfortable position to put those welds in on the backside, and then get inside the wheel wells with the wheel off to get the welds all inside of there as well. But as always, I'll post a link in the description on all the parts that I used in this video. And if you guys want to help support the channel, make sure to check out the Outjeeping Etsy store. I restocked on some of your favorite decals, as well as got some new decal designs. You guys can go check that out as well. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and hopefully you guys learned something. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Outjeeping YouTube channel to help keep these videos coming. And comment below if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.